who you have brought with you today. As we all know, the OMB is responsible for preparing the President's budget, reviewing federal regulations, and providing the proper oversight of federal agencies. It is a very, very important task, and I know that both of you are more than capable of leading OMB. Since last March, Ms. Young has been serving as acting director of OMB, so she is already doing the job for which she is nominated. So she has some real-life experience behind her as we discuss her application today. Prior to her start at OMB, Ms. Young served for 14 years as a top staffer on the House Appropriations Committee, where by all accounts, she did an excellent job working with Democrats and Republicans on legislation that must be passed each and every year that impacts the lives of every American. Ms. Colleretti has more than 2 decades of experience in public service. She previously served as Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and several positions at the U.S. Treasury Department, where, among other duties, she helped stand up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Prior to that, she was the policy director and later budget director for the mayor's office in San Francisco. Again, the Senate has previously confirmed both of these nominees to high-ranking positions in the past on strong bipartisan votes, and I hope and expect we will do so again in short order. This is our first Budget Committee hearing of 2022, and we are facing many challenges as a nation, as I think everybody knows, and certainly challenges that our nominees are familiar with. We have now entered year 3 of the pandemic, as thousands of Americans continue to die from COVID every single day, and hospitals continue to be overwhelmed with patients. In my view, we are moving toward an oligarchic form of society where the people on top have incredible wealth and power, while most Americans are struggling to pay their bills. We have a dysfunctional healthcare system which costs us more than any other country, and yet we have over 90 million people who are uninsured or underinsured, and we pay the highest prices in the world for our prescription drugs. And among other things, climate change is an existential threat to the existence of the planet. Other than that, not much. Bottom line, I think we can all agree, although our solutions may be different, this country faces enormous problems. So with that, I would say that I have been impressed by the work that Ms. Young has done and look forward to supporting her. And now let me give the gavel over to Senator Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To both of our nominees, congratulations. Ms. Young, you're well known to the committee, particularly those of us on appropriations, and always enjoyed working with you, Ms. Colletti. Is that right, Colletti? Did I get it right?
Colleretti.
Colletti.
Yeah.
So I think you're both well qualified. You might talk me out of voting for you, but I doubt it. So, but I do want to talk about a few things that I think are important to your jobs. Number one, yeah, climate change is real. You know, I'd like to do something about it. But there are a lot of threats out there. This is a chart of just some of the problem areas of the world. If you're Israel, Iran's definitely an existential threat to you. They want to kill all the Jews. I don't know why they want to do that, but that's what they keep talking about. And I think they would if they could, but it's just not the Jewish state. They'd go after a lot of folks in the in the Muslim faith to purify the faith and make it in the own image of their form of radical Shiism, and they'd kill all of us because we don't agree with them religiously. So I just want to highlight in this chart behind me, North Korea, China, Russia, Ukraine, the rise of ISIS back in Syria, the debacle in Afghanistan. I don't think I've ever remember a time this dangerous, maybe since the 1930s. So from our point of view, We believe that the president's budget, Biden, the 2022 defense budget, called for a 1.6% increase in spending. That's well below inflation, with almost a 16%, I think, increase in non-defense spending. Now, those priorities are just out of sync with the world as we know it. The number one job of the federal government, to me, is to defend our nation, and the Biden budget has defense spending below inflation, well below inflation, and the National Defense Strategy Commission, a nonpartisan commission of defense experts, unanimously agreed that in order to deter China and Russia, that the United States would need to increase defense spending by 3 to 5% in real growth. That would be above inflation. And the failing to increase would make it necessary to alter the expectations of the U.S. defense strategy and our global strategic objectives, which is, I think, a bad idea. So the budget, if adopted, would put us at 2.5% of GDP on national security, which is in the historically low arena. So we're negotiating, Democrats and Republicans, about trying to use the appropriations process, not the continuing resolution process, to fund the government. I think people on our side are going to be very insistent that the defense number meet the reality that we face as a world and as a nation. So having said that, your job at OMB will be to kind of ride herd over the regulatory side of government, will be to advise the president and run the office. And I think you're both very capable people. Whatever differences we have will be honestly held. And I just want to use my time, Mr. Chairman, to focus on trying to get us as a body, working with the administration, to top-line numbers for budget purposes to appropriate rather than a continuing resolution that's just a terrible way to run the Defense Department. And I hope that the two ladies in front of us, if they get these jobs, can help us in that process. So with that, I will yield back.
Thank you very much. Is Senator Murray available for an introduction for Ms. Young? Okay. If not, Senator Kramer, do you want to introduce Ms. Young?
Well, I'd be honored to. I hope I'm not stepping on Senator Murray's toes by going ahead of her, but what the heck, Senator Kennedy's not even here, and he's from Louisiana. I'm from little old North Dakota. But I think it speaks volumes to what relationship means. It's not geographic, it's relationship. And I want to say, first of all, Mr. Chairman, you did an excellent job with Ms. Young's credentials. You didn't mention that she's a new mom, which is probably the greatest credential of all time, and congratulations on that. I just want to add a couple of insights having worked with Director Young in this last year. As you pointed out, she's been confirmed to be the deputy, but has served as the acting director, and that in and of itself is challenging enough. But on top of that, of course, we have this other thing going on, this pandemic and all these other issues, workforce scattered about, working as best they can remotely, all big challenges, and she's met them all. I have found Shalonda to be smart, extremely witty. In fact, I would suspect in a witty off, you would beat the ranking member. I'm pretty sure, but hopefully he'll still vote for you. She's classy, and here's what I love as much as anything, Mr. Chairman. You talked about her role as a staff lead in the House in the Appropriations Committee, and that's where I first, of course, learned about her good work. What has impressed me so much, and what I've seen in practice as well as in words, is that she has not just an understanding of the legislative process, but a real respect for the institution. And that means a lot. That makes all of us better at our jobs, including the folks at OMB. I can tell you from firsthand experience that in my now 10 years roughly in Congress, I've never worked with a budget director that was as attentive, that was as understanding, that could drill down as deeply on specific issues, and actually took the time to do it, as Director Young has. We have a couple of major water infrastructure projects in North Dakota that have been authorized many times, but never really dealt with appropriately by OMB, and they have now. and I thank you for that. She immediately responded to our concerns about the metropolitan statistic area definitions. Something, you know, when you come from a small state with small cities, it really matters. Even on manufacturing regulations, when we had a question or a concern that was raised, her and her staff got right on it, and I don't know that you could ask for anything more or anything better from somebody who directs an agency as large and as important as OMB. And for those reasons and a whole bunch of others, I'm, first of all, greatly touched and honored that you'd ask me to introduce you, Shalonda, and it is my great pleasure to do that. And Senator Graham, there's nothing she could do today to get me to vote against her. And with that, welcome.
They may
Thank you.
withdraw our nomination after all this, yeah.
She's very witty, I warn you, she's very witty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Kramer. I think Senator Murray is not yet available, so we're going to go to Senator Padilla for his introduction of Ms. Coloretti. Senator.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders and Ranking Member Graham. I'm proud to introduce President Biden's outstanding nominee to be the Deputy Director of OMB. Nane Coloretti is a lifelong advocate for economic opportunity and the needs of working families. She spent more than a decade of her career as a public servant in the city and county of San Francisco, rising to become San Francisco's Budget Director in the office of then Mayor Gavin Newsom. Ms. Coloretti is an experienced leader in the federal government as well. She joined the Treasury Department in 2009 as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Management and Budget. And in that role, she helped shape the newly created Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Her record of success led to her appointment as an Assistant Secretary for Management at the Treasury Department, where she oversaw and modernized a workforce of hundreds of public servants managing our economic recovery. In 2014, President Obama nominated Ms. Coloretti to serve as Deputy Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development Department. She drew on her long experience and relationships in local government to not only improve public housing, but to do so through community partnerships while prioritizing equity at the same time. Currently, Senior Vice President at the Urban Institute, Ms. Coloretti is an insightful advocate for public policies that will help more families achieve their American dream. She's proven to be a skillful manager and an empathetic leader. She's highly qualified to support the critical work of the executive branch of our federal government as Deputy Director of OMB, and I urge the committee to support her swift confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and you had 8 seconds remaining. I believe that Senator Murray is now available for an introduction of Ms. Young. Senator Murray, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I am really glad to be here today to
Murray?
provide a
Oh,
brief
there you are.
introduction of Shalonda Young and to
You're
express
on mute. How many times in the last 2 years have people said that? You're on mute. All right, I say it one more time.
yeah, is it working?
You need to say it louder.
You're on mute. Silent.
No,
Here.
Mute. Somebody text.
can you hear me yet?
All right. Can't hear you.
Let me work on it.
All right.
Can you hear me yet?
So this is one of the many reasons we all hope to God this pandemic is behind us, right? All right, Senator Murray will, I'm sure,
Yeah.
be back. But why don't we, in the meantime, swear our 2 nominees in?
Shoot. Okay. I'm trying to get a hold of my staff. Can you hear me now?
Under the rules of the committee, nominees are required to testify under oath. Ms. Young and Ms. Coloretti, please rise. Do you swear the testimony that you will give before the Senate Budget Committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And will you also agree to appear before this committee in the future and answer any questions that the members of the committee might have?
I do.
Yes.
Thank you. Please be seated. One last try for Senator Murray.
Can you hear it yet?
Loud and, we hear you very loudly. All right,
Okay, for the record, it wasn't me, it was the committee staff. Bless their souls.
all right. You're actually now too loud. Tone it down a little bit.
Yeah, I was using my preschool yell at you voice, but okay. Can you
All
hear
right.
me now?
That's great. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I am really glad to be here today to provide a brief introduction of Shalonda Young and to express my strong support for her swift confirmation as OMB director, a role she has filled already on an acting basis for the past year. I've actually known Ms. Young for many years. Many of us have. And we know Ms. Young for her expertise, her unmatched work ethic, and maybe most importantly, a willingness and proven track record of bringing both sides, Republican and Democrat, together to get things done for the American people. When we talk about appointing good people in government, people who will do the work, we're all talking about Shalonda Young. Any senator who has worked on any major spending deal during Ms. Young's tenure on the House Appropriations Committee has seen she knows the budget process inside and out. Ms. Young would also make history as the first Black woman to lead the Office of Management and Budget, bringing a really important perspective as we work to build an economy that really works for everyone in this country. And on that note, I think it's important to mention that Ms. Young is a brand new mom. Working moms have felt some of the worst of this pandemic at a time when a full-blown childcare crisis is happening, and the lack of a strong national paid leave policy has been especially hard for our working moms, forcing many of them to turn down extra hours or promotions or even quit entirely. I can't think of anything more appropriate than putting a working mom in charge of America's budget. Mr. Chairman, we are facing more challenges than almost any time I can remember. COVID-19, an ongoing threat to our public health and our economy. The pandemic has shone a light and worsened so many long-standing challenges like childcare and the cost of housing. And we're seeing the effects and costs of the climate crisis in every part of this country. We need a steady hand to help guide our economic recovery, and that person is Shalonda Young. Few people understand the federal budget or appropriations process like Ms. Young, and even fewer have the benefit of her years of experience negotiating tough deals with both Republicans and Democrats. Let's waste no time in confirming her so she can keep working for the American people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Murray. And now let's hear from Ms. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank Senator Murray, Senator Kramer for those wonderful words of introduction. You know, I won't promise you lunch other than the Senate dining room, but this is the two who introduced me today are testaments to relationships that can be built in this institution. Senator Kramer and I have gotten to know each other very well the last year, working together, and the same with Senator Murray, so thank you both very much. My family has found a new star, my daughter, so they are mostly home, looking at her sleep and maybe watching me, but I want to thank my dad for escorting me here today as the lone person who drew the short stick, actually. She really is much cuter than watching me do this today. So, but I still want to thank my family, who's been a big support. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today as President Biden's nominee for Director of the Office of Management and Budget. It's been my honor to serve the last 10 months as the acting director. I'm grateful to the President for the trust he has put in me as his nominee. When I first came before this committee last March, I told you a little about my experience growing up in rural Louisiana. I talked about my years leading the House Appropriations Committee as its top staffer, serving this institution I care about so deeply, and I mean that. And I made a commitment to you that I would focus my service at OMB on restoring regular order, partner with Congress in a spirit of bipartisanship and mutual respect, and delivering results for the American people. Over the past 10 months, I've kept that commitment, working alongside the extraordinary team at OMB and with members of this committee from both sides of the aisle. I'd like to briefly highlight just 5 of OMB's achievements that showcase what our team is capable of with partnership with the Senate and this committee in particular. First, together with Congress, we delivered crucial disaster relief funding for communities across the country, not only to respond to Hurricane Ida and last year's devastating wildfires, but to address unmet recovery needs from Hurricanes Laura and Delta. Working with FEMA, we announced nearly $5 billion last year to help communities prepare for and respond to extreme weather events. And with the help of Congress, we secured another $4.5 billion through the bipartisan infrastructure law to rebuild community resilience. Second, we worked with members of both parties to help develop and enact the bipartisan infrastructure law, permanently authorizing the FAST 41 law, something I committed to get done during my confirmation hearings last March. And OMB is focused on implementing this law with the highest level of effectiveness and accountability. Third, we stood up a new Made in America office that has already facilitated billions of dollars in new purchases to support American manufacturing. The office has brought unprecedented transparency to the waiver review process, important progress that matters to many of us in this room. I'm grateful that the bipartisan infrastructure law expanded the Made in America requirements to all federal infrastructure funding and codified this important office at OMB so that it's around for future administrations. Fourth, we took action to make the federal government more efficient, effective, and accountable to the public. Those steps include OMB's work to implement a new executive order to streamline government services and improve customer experience, as well as much-needed progress on investing in IT modernization across the federal government. And finally, in keeping with the President's long-standing commitment to oversight, we directed agencies to focus on 2 important areas: restoring the integrity and independence of their inspectors general and working with Congress to ensure that IGs can fulfill their mandate. I know that there are legitimate differences in this country, in this room, that deserve honest debate, and I've appreciated the opportunity to speak directly with many of you about them. If confirmed, I will continue to work closely with you and your colleagues to deliver for the American people, and I will continue to find common ground, to be responsive, and to rebuild the career staff at OMB who play an essential role in ensuring our government works for all Americans, and that's across any administration. Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and other members of the committee, thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much. Now we'll hear from Ms. Coloretti.
Thank you. Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and distinguished members of this committee, it's a privilege to come before you as President Biden's nominee for Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. I'd like to thank the members of the committee for considering my nomination and the many members who took the time to speak with me before this hearing. And thank you to Senator Padilla for his kind words of introduction. I'd also like to thank President Biden for putting his confidence in me. And it's an honor to be sitting here alongside my esteemed and hopefully potential future colleague, Shalonda Young. I'm honored and humbled by this nomination. I'd also like to recognize my husband of 24 years, David Goldstein, who's here with me today, my son, Kaleo Goldstein Coloretti, supporting me virtually from college, and I'd like to thank the many family members and friends who are watching this hearing from Hawaii to the East Coast. Finally, I'd like to recognize my parents, Tony and Marie Lonnie Coloretti, who both passed away over 5 years ago. It's through their sacrifices that I'm able to sit here today. My mom and dad both had immigrant parents who came to America in search of a better life for themselves and for their children. My parents worked hard to support my 4 sisters and me. My mom was a preschool teacher and then a home-based childcare provider, and my dad worked in restaurants and on cruise ships. Later on, I would also work in restaurants, which, along with federal student loans and Pell Grants, helped me finance my education. My parents taught me to focus on hard work and education, as well as the importance of curiosity and empathy. It's from them that I developed a passion for public service and a commitment to expanding opportunity for all. I come before you today as a public servant and leader with over 25 years of experience in federal, state, and local government service and in the private and nonprofit sectors. Much of my work has focused on helping deliver better outcomes for people, families, and taxpayers. In fact, my first federal service was as a program examiner at the Office of Management and Budget many, many years ago. I know firsthand that OMB has a critical role to play in implementing the President's priorities, touching every spending and policy decision in the federal government, and collaborating across agencies to deliver results effectively and efficiently. My work during the Obama-Biden administration as Deputy Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and before that, as Assistant Secretary and Acting CFO for Treasury, focused on using data to make better decisions, implement new programs, and strengthen the organizations that I led. At HUD, I managed the department's day-to-day operations, facilitated cross-cutting policy and regulatory issues, and oversaw a budget of $45 billion and approximately 8,000 employees. As Treasury's Assistant Secretary for Management and Acting CFO, I helped stand up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and helped create Treasury's quarterly data-driven decision framework to prioritize projects, align resources, and measure progress. I also understand how budget and policy decisions made here in Washington, D.C. affect local policy, having worked in San Francisco local government for 10 years. During the 2008 recession, I helped close a deficit worth half of San Francisco's discretionary budget, aided in the end by the Federal American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. If confirmed, I would be honored to work with the President and Congress to create and implement budgets that invest in American people, support our economic recovery, and reflect our country's shared values. Thank you again for considering my nomination, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you both very much. I give enough speeches, so I'm not going to give one today, but I just have a few questions that I'd like to ask. As I think Senator Murray indicated, and I think we all agree with, although we come from different perspectives, this is a very unusual moment in American history. People are struggling. The pandemic has wreaked havoc in so many ways, not only in terms of illness, but in isolation, in the nature of employment. People are quitting jobs in record-breaking numbers. So we're really in an unusual place in the modern history of this country. And one of the issues that has concerned me, and I think it doesn't get enough attention, is the growing gap between the very, very wealthy and everybody else. You got two people now who own more wealth than the bottom 40%. And during this pandemic, billionaires have seen an increase in their wealth by $2 trillion just in the last few years. So let me ask both of you, is that issue of massive income and wealth inequality something that concerns you? And what ideas do you have as to how we might go forward on that issue?
Senator Sanders, I was proud to put the president's budget forward, which spoke to this very issue. 400 billionaires own the same amount of wealth as 150 million of the poorest Americans. That is why you saw tax proposals from this president that sought to not only pay for the investments in a fiscally responsible way, but also speak to this issue of fairness in our tax policy in this country.
Ms. Colorani?
Senator, thank you for that question. I also support the president's ideas, and as he's put them forward in his policies and in his budget. They aim to build this economy back from the bottom up and the middle out, both in tax policy and in investments in critical items like childcare, which we know will not only help working mothers go back to work, but will also help increase the labor supply in this country, and we need to grow our economy and make it more productive.
Is it of concern to you that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right, while we pay far more for health care than any other nation and pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? Is that an issue of concern?
Senator, one of the key priorities for this president is to bring down the cost of prescription drugs for Americans. You saw the budget spoke to that. It is a price issue for the American people, and it's one thing we certainly hope to work with Congress on in the near future. You're absolutely right. The cost of health care in this country is unsustainable. And as we talk about our full economic picture debt deficit, you can't help but look at what it cost healthcare-wise in our Medicare and Medicaid system. So we have to do something to address that.
Ms. Colorandi?
Senator, I started my career in the federal service, as I mentioned, many, many years ago, working on Medicaid and health financing issues at the Office of Management and Budget, and I was very proud to pass a small expansion of healthcare in the Children's Health Insurance Program, obviously in partnership with Congress. So yes, I do support looking for ways to expand healthcare coverage and lower costs.
You know, I've heard many colleagues talk about how much they love America. Well, if you love America, it seems to me you love the children who are the future of America. And yet, for a very long time, we have had the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. We have tried through the American Rescue Plan to address that with some success. Through the direct payments to working parents, we reduced childhood poverty in this country by about 40%. That is no insignificant accomplishment. What is your thought about childhood poverty and how we might address that issue?
Senator, before I had a child, now especially, maybe I'm a bit sensitive to this, but as a developed country, as the leader of the free world, there's no issue, I think, more touching and something I hope we can all come together on in reducing childhood poverty. And you're absolutely right, the child tax credit, by all estimation of economists, looks to have reduced childhood poverty by 40%, and that was a huge accomplishment for that program.
Scalrini?
Senator, I'll just add to that. Another thing I worked on in San Francisco was providing universal preschool to all 4-year-olds. And so I support the administration's idea, and I think many of you support it as well, to provide universal pre-kindergarten for every 3- and 4-year-old in the country and make childcare more affordable for working families. I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is critical not just for working moms, but for also these investments actually are shown to pay off over time.
Right. Last question. We are the richest country in the history of the world, and yet millions of senior citizens today have teeth that are rotting in their mouths, can't afford the outrageous cost of hearing aids, can't afford eyeglasses. Do you agree that hearing, vision, and dental care are essential parts of health care, and that Medicare should be expanded to cover these basic health care needs?
Chairman Sanders, we spoke about this at, I believe, last year's hearings. That is why the president's budget supported providing hearing, vision, and dental coverage as part of Medicare expansion. And I was proud to come here and talk about that last year.
Thank you. Ms. Colorady?
Senator, just weighing in to agree.
Okay, thank you. Senator Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Young, as a member of the Appropriations Committee staff, did you work on defense budgets?
I happen to be staff director, so all of them, so defense included.
Yeah. So how do you see the world in terms of danger right now?
Senator, it's hard to look at the news. It's hard to go to the job I have and not hear about the very changing global picture we see every day, especially with what's going on in Eastern Europe.
Is that fair to say for you? Do you agree with that, Ms. Coletti?
Senator, just weighing in to agree.
Okay. So the point I'm making is if you look at President Biden's budget proposal and project it out to 2031, we'll be at 2.5% of GDP spending on defense. That will be below what we were doing on September the 10th, 2001, before we were attacked. So I just think that is a very dangerous glide path for our nation, and I'll be working with people, you and others, to try to change that. So I don't want to, make a bunch of speeches about defense other than we need a budget. Do you agree we need a budget quickly, Ms. Young?
Sign me up for as
Okay.
quick as possible.
What about an emergency supplemental? You think we need one of those too?
Senator Graham, we are assessing everything from COVID to our situation in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And we clearly will be in contact if we think the resources are needed.
Well, I got contacted by the administration about $3.5 billion for Afghanistan to go to UN agencies, not the Taliban. Count me in for that. I think the best way to do that is through an emergency supplemental. The World Food Program has been under siege because of COVID, and all kind of problems out there. We got problems at home and abroad, so I think an emergency supplemental would be well utilized and also to help the Ukraine. As a matter of fact, if we did have an emergency supplemental, would you support designating foreign military financing for Ukraine as part of that package?
Senator, you're looking at someone, I've visited Ukraine 3 times as a congressional staffer and know the issues very up close, and it's troubling by what we see there. So as you mentioned, we don't have a
You'd be
regular.
inclined to support that?
Well, we don't have a regular appropriations bill, so somewhere in
Yeah.
one of those packages, I won't dictate to the appropriations leaders how they do it.
Okay.
We certainly support Ukraine aid.
Okay. Iron Dome, 8 months ago, President Biden promised to provide $1 billion to replenish Israel's Iron Dome system following the barrage of missile attacks from Hamas in Gaza. To this point in time, the administration has not yet formally requested the additional Iron Dome funding. Do you know if that's going to happen? Do you support that happening?
Senator Graham, I think the Department of Defense has been clear with congressional leadership that they support that backfilling of Iron Dome. The last legislative vehicle, I understand, is pending in the Senate, but we certainly
I've been told
supported
that you haven't made a formal request of the Congress. Is that not accurate?
It's one of many things we have communicated through technical assistance to the Capitol. That is a normal way.
I would just say, the sooner the better that we can get Iron Dome replenished, because the world, and that part of the world is getting more dangerous also. So I look forward to working with you on that. We just passed a bipartisan infrastructure package, and I voted for, and we had a lot of money for roads and bridges and ports. One of the things that bothers a lot of us, just not me, is that the Federal Highway Administration issued a memo recently that says, that runs counter to congressional intent by discouraging the use of federal dollars by states for new highway capacity projects. In South Carolina, we need all the highways we can get. What's your view about that memorandum?
Senator, I was not involved in that memorandum, and I'm happy to take your concerns back and work with you to address any shortcomings.
Please do, because a lot of us who voted for that bill expected the states to have the flexibility they've had in the past to do, appropriately what they need to do. In our state, we do need more roads, and that I appreciate if you could talk to people over the highway department about that. Finally, when do you expect that we will get the next budget?
As you know, Senator, the State of the Union is March 1st. It is typical that the State of the Union would lead into a budget. So that is certainly our expectation that you would see that normal course of interaction between the State of the Union and the budget.
And finally, do you agree with me that continuing resolutions really are harmful to the Defense Department?
What does that say behind you? The world is a dangerous place?
Yeah.
So every 2-week, every 3-week increments is not the way to budget.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to speak with both these great candidates today. Both of these women share a wealth of experience that they bring to these roles and the right skill sets that I believe we need. I already spoke in strong support of Ms. Young's nomination. I also want to add my support for Ms. Coloretti's nomination. I know she brings a wealth of experience as well. I think this is going to be a great team leading OMB for really a critical time in our country's history. On the COVID-19 response and economic recovery, some people thought we went too big last year when we wrote the American Rescue Plan, and I think it's plain to see today that's not the case. We have seen a stronger and much faster economic recovery because of the bill that the Democrats wrote and passed, 6.4 million jobs back into the economy since a year ago. But we do know there's more work to be done. We can't recover from this crisis if we don't, at long last, take some bold steps to really help lower costs for families, like finding and affording quality childcare where they live, giving parents the opportunity to enroll their kids into preschool at no cost, making a landmark investment in climate action and clean energy, because we can see that that climate crisis is here and now, and reduce the cost of prescription drugs and housing and more. We have proposals to address all of these that are long-term and fully paid for, that will actually cut the deficit over the time. So I wanted to ask both our nominees today if you can respond. what is the economic case for these strong and decisive proposals included in the Build Back Better to put money back into people's pockets and make sure our economy works for us? And Ms. Young, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Senator Murray. And look, I know these proposals are pending before Congress. So I'll just speak in the macro benefits of those things and not necessarily the legislative vehicle. I'll leave that to the experts here sitting around the table. But when you look at our economy, you're absolutely right. It has grown the fastest clip last year since 1984, 5.7%. Economic growth, 3.9% unemployment, over 6 million jobs added. But there's more to be done. I think people around the table are rightfully speaking about price pressures in people's pockets. And what better way to deal with those than to use government investment to bring down the cost of prescription drugs that they have to pay out of pocket to even stay healthy. Child care cost to help the American people not spend more than 7% of their income on child care. You cannot go to work without adequate child care, as I'm quickly finding out with a 3-month-old. It is essential to the household. So there's an economic case to these proposals that you're not just pandemic related, but these were things that I'd argue were deficits that we need to come out better on the other side of this pandemic than when we entered it.
Thank you, Ms. Coloretti.
Senator Murray, I really appreciate this question. I think these proposals are aimed at building this economy. We've said it before, I'll just say it again, from the bottom up and the middle out, in the effort to grow the economy and direct investments into people so that they can actually become more productive and contribute to a growing economy. And I think that the Biden administration, as I observe it from the outside, is directed in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Look, I'm really concerned we haven't reached a deal to get this year's appropriations bill to the president's desk, and the clock is ticking. Ms. Young, can you speak to the importance of reaching a spending agreement for fiscal year 2022 and some of the consequences if we fail to do so?
Sometimes I find it hard to find the words to this question. It is so incredibly important. You just heard Senator Graham talk about the defense needs and the uncertainty in the world. We cannot address those by 2, 3 week, 4 week increments. It is a dangerous proposition. The same if you go talk to your state and local governments who are waiting on critical grant funding. We don't do those in a CR. So it delays investments by your state and local. So it really is paramount to get an appropriations deal done, and we stand willing from the administration's point of view to help do what we need to do to bring that to fruition.
Thank you. And quickly before I close, I just want to raise 2 issues of critical importance to my home state of Washington. We have discussed these previously, Ms. Young, and the first is salmon recovery. And it's so important to restore these Pacific Northwest iconic salmon runs. We got to continue our work on that. And the second is the federal government's moral and legal obligation to clean up the Hanford nuclear site. So I want to tell you, I'm going to be talking to you about this more, but we've got to make sure that Hanford is on a cost-effective trajectory without compromising the cleanup mission. We've got a lot of work ahead there. With that, let me thank you both for being willing to do these. I look forward to working with the chairman to get you confirmed as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Young and Ms. Coloretti, thank you for joining us today. At your nomination hearing back in March of last year, Director Young, I asked you about the economic public health justification for spending about $2 trillion in the ARP bill, which was devoted mostly to programs that had very little or nothing to do with COVID. It was really a partisan wish list, and that's how it was passed after $4 trillion on the bipartisan basis had been passed the previous years. Well, the subsequent year has proven almost everything my Republican colleagues and I have warned about on that $2 trillion ARP bill. Just by way of a quick review, it spent $400 billion on universal government checks, $200 billion on unemployment insurance plus-ups that paid recipients more not to work than they made working, $126 billion to schools regardless of whether or not they opened, $97 billion for a bailout of union pension plans. The list goes on and on. But the results, according to the CBO, was zero job growth above and beyond what they had anticipated would occur if you never passed the ARP. Oh, and COVID cases hit record highs. Oh, and we have the highest inflation in 40 years and a whole lot more federal debt. Now, you, Ms. Young, maybe ought to get a pass on ARP. I know you supported it. I'm sure you still do. It was proposed and passed before you were confirmed. But now I'm concerned that the policies being proposed have gotten worse. I mean, ARP was counterproductive, but at least it was temporary. The so-called Build Back Better bill, as proposed, will be the single most damaging domestic legislation in generations. It's clearly an attempt to make America's middle class dependent on the government, with this free universal preschool, free government paid family leave, free government funded child care, free expanded child tax credit, expanded Obamacare subsidies, dramatic erosion of any sense of personal responsibility. Oh, and the largest tax hike since 1968, which would end up being paid for to a very large degree by American families and make the U.S. competitive. Now, I understand, thankfully, that that's at least on pause right now. I hope it actually goes on a permanent hiatus. But I want to zero in for a minute on a topic that you and the ranking member touched on briefly, and that is the provisions in the ARP that allocated $350 billion for state and local governments to spend on pretty much anything remotely related to even responding to the pandemic. And what's so shocking about that is that it occurs despite the fact that state and local governments were not in any kind of fiscal crisis in 2020 or 2021. In fact, in the aggregate, they were taking in all-time record high amounts of revenue in 2020 even. And we knew that in March of 2021. And then in 2021, they shattered the record from 2020. And the increases were quite dramatic. In 2019, state and local governments took in a little over $11 trillion. It was well over $12 trillion by 2020. It was about an 11% increase. If you look at the first 3 quarters of 2019 and compare that to the first 3 quarters of 2021, it's a 27.5% increase in the tax revenue, which was already a record high level of revenue. And so what's the effect of that been? Well, states are just swimming in cash, literally. I mean, California reported a $75 billion budget surplus for 2021. And as I predicted then, states have decided, well, they don't know really what to do with this money. So they're cutting taxes. Even virtually bankrupt Illinois has a plan for $1 billion tax cut. And the governor there says that the state's in the best fiscal position it's been in decades. State and local governments have also chosen to waste some of this money, not knowing what else to do with it. We have Syracuse, New York, spending $2 million to plant new trees. Norwich, Connecticut, building luxury apartments. The city of Chicago has decided to spend $31 million to create a guaranteed income program. It goes on and on. Again, let me just recap. ARP sent $350 billion to state and local governments after Congress had given about $650 billion of extraordinary money. This is all above and beyond what we ordinarily send to the state and the local governments. And that is all on top of absolute all-time record levels of revenue collections. So when I hear about supplementals for more domestic spending, I just want to state for the record, there is no reason that Congress should be providing still billions more on top of the $6 trillion it already did, when there are hundreds of billions of dollars remain unobligated and more money than state governments have ever even seen. I do have a question I will send to you for the record regarding getting federal workers back to work in the offices to deal with Social Security, VA, and the IRS backlog. I will send that as a question for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Toomey. Senator Stabenow. Senator Whitehouse.
Oh, no, I'm actually here, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you. I'm actually here. I'm sorry that the camera was turned off. Thank you so much for the hearing. It's wonderful to see the two nominees in front of us, such wonderful qualified nominees. I do need, though, to just say something to correct the record from my colleague and friend who just spoke about the American Rescue Plan. I know that this was something every Democrat voted for, every Republican voted against, and so I understand that folks want, and the Republican side want to make it seem like it's the worst thing ever. But the reality is this, that when President Biden took office, there were 18 million people that were on unemployment insurance, and now it's 2 million, 18 million to 2 million. We help businesses create 6 million jobs, the greatest year of job creation in American history. We've seen the best economic growth since 1984. We've seen the biggest single year drop in our unemployment rate in our nation's history. And so we know that because of COVID-related challenges and supply chain breakdowns and so on, there's so much more to do in lowering costs for people. But the record is very clear in terms of the robust economy and what is happening right now. We just need to keep it going. So, Ms. Young, again, welcome, and Ms. Colleretti, it's wonderful to be speaking to you again. And I wanted to specifically start with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which includes a lot of provisions to ensure federal purchasing and infrastructure spending to make sure it's American-made products. You know, we make a lot of things in Michigan. I care a lot about that. We make things and grow things. I happen to think that we should be using American tax dollars to purchase those things. And we were very fortunate to get a provision that I authored along with Senator Braun to solidify the Made in America office's role within the federal government, to have that now be law. And so the office is now in charge of enforcing Buy American laws and ensuring that taxpayer dollars are used to uplift American manufacturing, put our workers first, our small businesses first, and shore up our domestic supply chains, which we know are critical. We need to be making more things and then buying more things as a federal government made in America. So, Ms. Young, could you talk about the Made in America office's role in implementing Buy America provisions from the infrastructure bill, and what resources the office needs to ensure that the implementation is done effectively? I know people in my state, and I believe people around the country, want very much to see this move forward aggressively and be successful.
Thank you, Senator, and I want to thank you for your help codifying that office in the infrastructure law. We started that office in OMB through executive order, and so was very happy that the bipartisan law ensured that it will be around for future administrations. The president was very clear, even before the infrastructure law. He gave us an edict around the table that we needed to look at the waiver process. The agencies almost without thinking, issue waivers for Buy America provisions that you all have worked on and passed. In this office and OMB are meant to ride roughshod over this process. It shouldn't just be automatic. It needs to be justified. So we're trying to bring some rigor to that process, not just for the bipartisan infrastructure law, but for all that we purchase. We talk about appropriations bills, $1.5 trillion a year of basic annual spending, and a lot of the waivers are done through that process. So our intention is to make things in America. If the pandemic showed us nothing, supply chains are vulnerable. We need to bring American manufacturing back, and that is one of the things the office will focus on now, I would say during its tenure, but now its tenure will hopefully be for the foreseeable future now that you've helped codify it into law.
Well, thank you. And I know I'm just about out of time, so I want to move to a different topic that each of you are welcome, either of you, to comment on. But one of the things that we know from the COVID pandemic is that mental health and substance abuse issues have increased substantially, and they're going to linger certainly on past the pandemic. In fact, between April of 2020 and April 2021, more than 100,000 people died of a drug overdose, and we have so many other numbers that relate to young people and suicides and people who need all kinds of mental health help. And I have, as you know, been laser focused with my colleague, Senator Roy Blunt, on creating a system where healthcare above the neck is funded the same as healthcare below the neck. And we're now on the way to doing that with community behavioral health clinics. And so I would ask for your support for these. I won't go through all the pieces, and we have all kinds of information about how this is successful in keeping people out of jail that don't need to be there, out of the emergency room who don't need to be there, out of homeless shelters that don't need to be there. You know, we've got this program fully operationalized in 10 states right now with startup grants, and 40 different states have startup grants, but 10 states are fully implementing this, and we need this across the country. So I'm concerned, or I'm interested in urging that the president's budget do even more. His first budget proposed 125 million increase in the startup grants. Frankly, we need additional dollars for that, and we need to have the full expansion nationwide put in place. So I would ask both of you if you would work with me, work with Senator Blunt, on fully operationalizing this critical part of our healthcare system.
We'd love to work with you on any mental health proposals.
Agree.
Thank you very much, Senator Stabenow. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through ARPA, we spent 1.9 trillion, and I think 10% of that was aimed particularly at COVID relief. And I'm curious, with all the money that we've spent so far, and it still astounds me that we're nearly 30 trillion in debt, and we're looking to borrow more money and spend more, regardless of the merits. I think there's a lot here that obviously we do need to address, but not in the way that we've done it, amassing that much debt into the system. I'd like to focus in, have a question for Ms. Young. How much money is still out there in terms of your what you think it is, what it really is, that is unspent from what we've done already? And is that something that we should be looking at first before we actually tee up more money, especially when it comes to COVID relief items like masks and testing and so forth? What is your, I know the figure that I think has been given to the committee. I'd like to know what you think it is out there that's unspent funds that we could tap rather than, spending more money for things where we've got the funds sitting unused.
Senator, we've mostly used, and we provided that information to the committee at the request of you and several other senators. So I'm glad you have it. 97% of the funds pre-ARP have been obligated. As you mentioned, ARP was both direct COVID relief healthcare dollars. Most of that has been obligated or announced. That is what helped us get through Omicron variant. The money that is not obligated is something Senator Toomey talked about, state and local funding. That represents most of the non-obligated funding. So the healthcare pieces is mostly gone, given the response we've had to do for Omicron. The other side of the table are the economic state and local money, and that is the majority of the funding left from ARP.
And is it correct that if we focus on what the states have, that figure is close to $340 billion?
That sounds right, Senator.
And then, even though that's in the states' coffers, wouldn't it make sense that for those states that have unspent balances, that we would ask them to spend through that first before we would give them more money, or we do something federally that might duplicate it?
Well, Senator, the point of state and local funding was to ensure that they could, at the state and local level, respond to the pandemic. So I would certainly hate to see us do that and another variant come up. We've also, while Omicron is extremely contagious, I think we have gone through these variants with some level of success. And state and locals are utilizing these funds to also do mitigation efforts at their level. So we have to be careful about pulling money back and before we know what the future twists and turns of this virus brings.
Well, I think just for anybody in the public that's listening, back in 08, 09, I think the total that we spent when it was systemically something actually affecting the economy, not a healthcare crisis in terms of how we were going to remediate it, called for all this spending. I think we spent $800 to $900 billion. And of course, we've spent $4 trillion, another $2 with ARPA, and then a lot more requests for more. I guess in a short period of time, hundreds of billions has become passé. And the other thing the public needs to know is the Fed has pretty well accommodated all that by putting that debt on their balance sheet. I think that is largely, what is driving now what is not transitory, but is somewhat of a stubborn inflation rate, 7 to 8%. One other question. In the December 2020, Congress passed the Consolidated Appropriations Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. The legislation included $1.375 billion for the construction of border barriers. On the first day in office, President Biden signed a presidential proclamation to pause construction and funding for the border barrier. Despite a continuing resolution, there is still an authorization and appropriation to build out that barrier. What will it take for the administration to follow the law? And are there other issues where the administration plans to ignore Congress?
Senator, I take the Empowerment and Control Act as serious as anybody in this room. That is why GAO has found that this administration has acted properly within the confounds of that law and that we are obligating prudently. It may not be on what everyone thinks it should be, but we have environmental remediation to be done. We have gaps to be filled. We have returned billions of dollars to the Department of Defense where it belongs. So we are doing what we not only believe is responsible, but GAO has validated that.
So do you intend to spend the $1.4 billion
We are spending it
on a border barrier?
On utilize efforts. You can only spend it on certain things. We can't even spend it on technology.
That's what we authorized.
Yeah, so we are spending on what we are authorized to spend it on, and GAO has validated that.
Okay, thank you, Senator Braun. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Director Young, Ms. Colleretti. Thanks for being here. I want to ask you a little bit about healthcare cost, and then if I have a moment, a little bit about climate cost. On healthcare costs, the Budget Committee staff are going to give you a copy of this graph, which I've used before and you may have seen before, and it charts that after the CBO healthcare spend projection of 2010, something began to change. Actual federal healthcare spending began coming in lower and lower and lower compared to what CBO had projected. And even with the added spend of COVID, we're still below those projections. And if you look forward, if you extrapolate CBO's projection forward and extrapolate forward from the actual, between now and the next decade, our budget period, there's $6 trillion in healthcare savings that we've experienced. Again, projected going forward. And we don't exactly know why that is, but I very strongly believe that it has to do with accountable care organizations that we set up in Obamacare, the so-called triple aim, delivery system reform, trying to make healthcare more patient-centered, all of those things that allow doctors to keep patients healthier rather than stay on the fee-for-service treadmill, ends up saving money because a healthier patient doesn't cost as much in healthcare expense. So what I would like to do is to make sure that in the years ahead, you will both be keeping your eye on the ball of how we do more of whatever it is that has saved us the $6 trillion, while also providing healthier patients, happier patients, and doctors who feel more rewarded in their practice.
Senator Whitehouse, when we've talked a lot about debt and deficits here, but the main drivers are the aging population, cost of health care. So we're looking for exactly the types of solutions that you're bringing attention to. These ACOs created in the ACA are the type of cost containment mechanisms we need to look at and see if there's more of that we should be doing.
And just one fine Rhode Island point on it, we've been working for years in Rhode Island to bring these principles to bear on patients who are in nearing the end of life or in what is called advanced care, and to free up doctors to provide the care that they need without wasteful steps that Medicare pricing policy demands. And we're seeking waivers through CMMI. I just want to flag that for you because we will be pursuing this to make sure that all the work we've done in Rhode Island doesn't come to naught at the hands of the federal government. So I'll flag that for you. You don't need to respond. We can talk more in person, but it's an important Rhode Island priority for me. Climate goals. Freddie Mac has warned of a coastal property values crash that will cascade through the rest of the economy the way the mortgage meltdown in 2008 cascaded through the economy. Central banks around the world are warning of a carbon bubble that could precipitate a global economic collapse when the bubble bursts. The Fed is beginning to make similar warnings here in the United States. And the insurance industry is warning that risks like flooding risks and wildfire risks are becoming so unpredictable as to be uninsurable. With those warnings out there, do you intend at OMB to take this problem of climate costs coming at us seriously? And do you have anything to say to us here in the Senate about how seriously we should take those warnings?
Senator, I think the president's budget speaks for itself on the climate investments you see. We see it as an existential threat to the economy, to the global economy, to the American people. That is why you've seen young people around the world look at climate change as an issue they should care passionately about, given that their future is very tied to it. You heard in my opening statement the billions of dollars we spend from a federal government to respond to and rebuild from these catastrophic events that have continued to get worse. So at OMB, we take it very seriously and commit to work with anyone who sees this as a threat that takes, and it will take solutions from Congress to deal with.
Just to put a dollar perspective on it, if we can get ahead of the climate problem, we will save hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, Chairman. Wish you both well. Can't wait to be working with you, confirmed in your positions fully and officially.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Young, it's nice to see you again. The last time you were here, I asked you a few questions on the budget. So the first one is, what is our federal deficit now, our federal debt now?
Federal debt is in the 30s of trillions.
Okay. And how about what was our deficit last year, and what do you project the deficit to be this year?
I want to make sure I get that right, Senator Scott. I don't have the number at my fingertips.
Okay. And do you know what our revenues were last year, last fiscal year?
Clearly not enough that we didn't have a deficit, but again, I'll get those numbers to the committee.
Okay. Now, the deficit last year was $2.8 billion. And the number, our collections this last year was $4 trillion. Do you know what our expenses were last year?
Whatever the delta of those two numbers are.
Okay. How about our interest expense on our federal debt?
I know it's still at one of the lowest rates in decades. We still pay very little on our debt, given the interest rates have remained low for the last 3 decades.
Yeah, we paid $413 billion last year, which is 7% higher than 2020. Do you know what the duration of our federal debt is?
I do not, sir.
Okay. And do you know off the top of your head the amount of unspent COVID money is?
We talked about the state and local dollars being around $300 billion, but 97% of the pre-ARP COVID funds remain obligated, and most of the direct COVID response dollars in ARP are obligated or spoken for.
Do you stay up with what the inflation rate is, the producer price index increases have been?
I do,
And what are they?
7%
For which one?
recently
For what, CPI?
for CPI.
Okay. So, Ms. Coloretti, can you give us those? What's our federal debt now?
I believe we said in the 30s of trillions of dollars.
Okay. And what do you think our deficit's going to be this year?
I think you said our deficit last year, and I'm guessing here, but $4 trillion. Yeah.
And the how much? So if you think our debt's in the 30s, how much debt can either for both of you? What can we have? Is there a cap? What's the amount that we can that you think is sustainable?
Senator, there are many ways to look at debt, many markers. One is, and what we have put forward as a theory of the case in the budget we submitted was, what is the cost of carrying debt? And we remain.
Let's assume it's where it is now. What would be the maximum debt we should have?
Our theory is it really depends on if debt becomes so costly to carry that we can't do other spending that we should be doing, and the interest rates remain very low at historic rates.
Yep.
So it has not crowded out other investments.
So what's the over the last 50 years? Do you know what the average interest rate for our 10-year Treasury is?
I don't.
So what if I said it's more? Let's say it's over 5%, and we have you said over $30 trillion worth of debt. Mm-hmm. So that would be $1.5 trillion worth of interest a year. Would that be unsustainable?
We don't think we're in an unsustainable situation. Again, it goes to the real cost of carrying debt, and our interest payments on the debt remain low and has not crowded out other investments we need to make in this country.
But you're not sure what our duration is. So if interest rates move, and they've moved up this year, as you know, they've moved up since the first of the year. So if the interest rates continue to move back to, let's say, the 50-year average, would that be sustainable then?
Senator Scott, of course, we have to relook at all of our assumptions if that historic nature of the cost of debt changes, but it has not in 30 years in any measurable form.
So, all right, I'll just say I'm surprised that you've been in the job for, I guess, almost a year, that these numbers are pretty significant. I mean, these numbers are numbers that it seems like you ought to know, because you ought to know the exact debt. You ought to know what we're doing in what we should do in collections and what our expenses are, because if you're a CFO of a company, that's what the expectations are, and that's how I think of this job. So, I mean, I think we ought to start looking at reality here. 30 trillion plus of debt, deficits that we can't afford, it's going to be very difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Merkley.
Hi, greetings. Can you hear me okay?
Actually, turn it down a little bit. You're coming around. You're a little bit loud.
Okay. I'll
Good.
speak more.
That's good.
Thank you, Deputy Director Young. And I have a couple details I'd like to ask you about. One is that we are still dealing with the horrific fires in the West, and we will be for forevermore. And one thing that has been helpful has been the funding of the National Guard to help provide fire crews during these worst moments. And the White House touted those investments in the National Guard in a press release last summer. But the administration did not put this fire training for the National Guard into their budget. And I want to ask if you will put it in their budget for next year. because it's become such an important additional component when we're in those mega fires.
Senator, the timing of the budget and when fire season and many of those initiatives came forward did not align, but we were happy to support those additional efforts given the devastating effect of those forest fires. So happy to go back and work with our agencies, DOD and others, and USDA and DOI to make sure we have adequate resources to fight fires, and we'll take back that specific proposal.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Second, I noted and appreciated President Biden's commitment to direct 40% of green federal investments towards environmental justice communities, something that is often greatly overlooked. And it's so important to have this kind of equity screen to track how agencies are spending their climate dollars to meet that commitment. What do you see as OMB's role in targeting and tracking those investments?
We are centerpiece of that initiative, Senator Merkley, and it is one of the top priorities we have in our office. So we look forward to partnering with you, keeping you up to speed on our efforts there. But we are, I think, the keepers of that initiative and look forward to carrying it out.
Thank you. Do you anticipate that you'll probably do annual reports in that regard to help us wrestle with how we're doing?
I think that's a great suggestion. You know, transparency here should be something that's paramount to make sure we're keeping the word of our value statement. So I'm happy to take that suggestion back as one way to make sure the public understands what we're doing.
Thank you. And then I wanted to turn to the challenge we face with each continuing resolution. At the end of that continuing resolution, the possibilities are we have another continuing resolution, or we pass the spending bills that the appropriation committees have invested so much in. And I know as former staffer for an appropriation committee, you know exactly how intense that process is. And the third option, which we don't like to talk about much, is that neither happens. And in that situation, we have a bit of a crisis. Do you think it's important to have contingency plans for that third option when the continuing resolution runs out and we don't succeed in immediately having another continuing resolution or spending bills in place?
Senator, I truly believe I've talked to you and most of your colleagues during this process and trying to do our part from the administration on getting full year bills passed. Everything I've heard, while you know it's difficult, everyone wants to get there, and I think and understands the devastating effects any threat of a shutdown would bring. So I'm maybe maybe I'll have egg on my face, but I'm optimistic that the appropriators and the rest of Congress can reach a deal. And I think everyone understands the devastating effects of continuing resolutions.
Well, I certainly believe that there is bipartisan understanding of how devastating option three, door number three is. And yet my question was, is your agency planning for how we would treat door number three if we should have to go through it?
I mean, we have to, Senator. It would be irresponsible not to. And I appreciate that the Congress works by deadline, so we have gotten pretty close up to the line, even though we knew Congress would come through. So even given that time frame, the last couple of CRs, we've run exercises to make sure we know what our plans are in case a deal isn't reached in time.
Great. Well, my role on the Appropriations Committee is as chair of the Interior Subcommittee. And there's many key components that we worry about a great deal behind door number three when we do not succeed in immediately having another continuing resolution or a spending bill, including the National Park Service. My staff on that subcommittee has sought to discuss the contingency plans for that situation and has not been able to get a briefing authorized for them. Can we make sure that that briefing happens?
Senator, we are happy to provide briefings. We are conscientious about when we talk about potential shutdowns, given how close in timing we are to needing a deal. So we will work something out. I know your staff well to make sure they have the information they need, but also not to portray a sense that we think we're headed down a bad road. So we will balance that.
Well, let's wrap the contingency planning in all kinds of optimism, but it's important that Congress be part of a discussion about the consequences, and hopefully increase the absolute motivation to make sure we don't end up in that place. And this request has been in place for, I think, going on 3 months now. And I don't really find it acceptable that OMB has been blocking Interior from providing such a conversation with the Interior subcommittee staff. And so I hope we can remedy that situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Merkley. Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Young, as you probably know, I was one of those that was part of the bipartisan negotiating team that put together the infrastructure bill. Our largest single investment was in highways. You can imagine our surprise when we see the Department of Transportation indicating that the highway money can't be used for increasing capacity of highways. This direction flies in the face of our intent and our needs. I recognize there are some states that aren't growing and may not need additional capacity: New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Rhode Island, and so forth. But there are other states that are growing fast: South Carolina, Florida, my state of Utah, fastest growing state in the nation over the last decade. We need to increase the capacity in our highways, or we're going to not see the economic growth which we projected as being part of this bill. Could you please get back to me and other members of our bipartisan group on progress on this front and what the status will actually be?
Senator, the ranking member has brought this to my attention today. I will absolutely look into this, and thank you for your work on that piece of legislation.
Thank you. A broader topic, which is, well, I have a 6-foot chart in my office that looks at going back to 2000 BC, which looks at the coming and going of great civilizations over time. And there is a common characteristic of civilizations in decline and that ultimately collapse, and that is that they end up spending far more than they take in. They're able to do that because other nations see them as being strong and loan money to them. They inevitably have a massive inflation in their economy. By doing so, they devalue their currency. At some point, their currency ceases being the reserve currency of the world. It is a real concern for many of us to see us year after year spend more money than we take in. And it is a precursor of economic calamity. Right now, we're seeing the economic impact being showered on the people of America that are suffering with very high rates of inflation. I was frankly alarmed that the numbers were not familiar to you and to your deputy director. The national debt is $29.9 trillion. It's not in the 30s. It will be. The projected deficits are roughly $1 trillion a year on a normal basis. If we have COVID relief packages, it kicks those numbers even larger. This is an ongoing threat to our nation and to the well-being of our citizens, and has to be a priority for you and for the administration. I would note that about 1/3 of federal spending is the portion that's part of the budget that you work on, that we vote on. 2/3 is automatic, so-called non-discretionary: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest. Contrary to what you indicated in your testimony, our interest rates have not been about the same over the last 30 years. They've come down dramatically and are now ticking back up. As a matter of fact, Bill Clinton called me after I lost my race back in 2012 and said his biggest concern was that interest rates going back to their normative level would take our interest payments to be even greater than our military spending. So this is a major issue that you need to focus on. I would encourage you and hope that you will include in the analysis and reports you provide not just the 1/3 that we vote on, but the 2/3 that we do not vote on, and project where that's going to be heading over the coming decade. This will determine whether we're able to keep up with other nations of the world and maintain our lead as the hope and guide for democracy throughout the world. will you make this a priority of your effort to see
Yeah.
what the total spending is and to see how our entitlements are affecting what our total debt and total deficit will be?
Senator Romney, you have my commitment to do that, and we have done that. Even off-budget items like Social Security, our budget fully reflected what the total outlays of the federal government are. We think that is the only way to present a unified budget. We did that in the 22 budget. We will do that again in the 23 budget.
I very much underscore the importance of this for all of us. We simply cannot keep going on spending trillions of dollars more than we take in without suffering high rates of inflation into the future and potentially losing our lead in the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Padilla. Senator Padilla.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate this opportunity to ask questions as both Acting Director Young and the nominee for Deputy Director Colleretti know from earlier hearing today in his GAC. Had a chance to be with them, but wanted to raise some issues that we talked about by phone prior to today. As a follow-up to those conversations, wanted to raise some questions about critical California flooding projects that protect the shoreline in and around San Francisco as probably the best example. Congress passed the fiscal year 2018 bipartisan budget act in order to construct urgent flood control projects nationwide, including San Francisco's shoreline. However, inflation, supply chain issues, and the Army Corps' initial underestimation of project costs have delayed these projects, which are now over budget. Easy to get over budget when the Army Corps initially underestimates. So I understand that the delays have been exacerbated by the Army Corps' decision, which is not reflected in statute. And I would note that unless 100% of the project costs are in hand, it cannot move forward with any piece of the project. If the administration hasn't asked for additional funding for this project in its budget, nor did it allocate any in the most recent work plan. You can understand my frustration when the Army Corps says it can't do the project until it has more money. Yet when Congress gives the Army Corps more money, it doesn't allocate any to the project. And this is a project that the Army Corps itself said was critical and urgent, which is why it was on the disaster funding list in the first place. So Acting Director Young, you can imagine, you see the absurdity of the situation we're in. Any thoughts on how we can resolve this?
It is something I focused on. We are working diligently with the Army Corps of Engineers on their legal interpretations on the mixing of money depending on what bills. You have my personal commitment to find a working solution here. You're absolutely right. If the government tells a community they're going to fund in a project, it is unacceptable to leave it not completed. So you have my commitment to find a workable solution here.
So, well, thank you for that. Another Army Corps item while I have you. The Army Corps' projects are essential to facilitating commercial navigation, mitigating disaster risk, of course, safeguarding ecosystems, and supporting economic growth. Now, OMB plays an influential role in the implementation of these projects, both clearing the authorization of a project and, once authorized by Congress, approving both funding requests in the president's budget as well as funding allocation to Army Corps' work plans. Acting Director Young, will you commit to evaluating potential changes to budgeting policies and economic benefit calculations that currently structured, disadvantage lower income communities and often communities of color, for example, where property values are lower?
This is why you see a focus and an entire executive order on the issue of equity. Sometimes the scores don't give a full story on the reasons the federal government should invest in communities. So you certainly have my commitment to make sure we look at a wide breadth of things when we look at federal investments.
Thank you. And in the time remaining, a question for Ms. Colleretti. I don't need to tell you from your experience at HUD and elsewhere the urgency with which we need to act on a homelessness and affordable housing crisis in America that predates the pandemic. The pandemic has underscored the need for affordable, safe, and supportive housing. Over the past 2 years, though, many have lost their housing, others have struggled to make rent or mortgage payments for the first time, and these hardships disproportionately impacted communities of color, lower income families, and those with disabilities. With your previous experience, how can you help shape or strengthen housing programs to better serve the people of our country?
Senator, appreciate that question and the chance to talk about this a little bit. My understanding is that the Biden administration has a strong commitment to increasing the supply and the affordability of housing. And in fact, in the FY22 budget, added additional dollars into housing choice vouchers, affordable housing supply, and resources to prevent and address homelessness for our most vulnerable. One of the things I was privileged to work on when I was at Housing and Urban Development was the issue of ending veterans' homelessness. And the issue is a coalition of federal, state, and local stakeholders to really address housing needs for the most vulnerable. And I believe the Biden administration is pointed in the right direction on this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to see both of you. Congratulations on your nominations. Thank you for your service. I know the state of the economy has been discussed a little bit today. I just think it's important to remind people of some figures, which is that before we enacted the American Rescue Plan, CBO projected that GDP growth in 2021 would be 4.6%. It turned out that real GDP growth was 5.7%, ahead of projections. And in another hearing in the Banking and Housing Committee, I asked the chairman of the Federal Reserve about the impact of the American Rescue Plan on unemployment, and he said unequivocally that it helped reduce unemployment. In fact, it reduced unemployment to under 4% 4 years earlier than CBO had projected. 4 years earlier than CBO had projected. Madam Acting Director Young, you and I have talked about the federal workforce and the need to make recruitment a top priority and retention a top priority. I chair the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Subcommittee and have heard from lots of federal agencies about the concerns about the hiring process and how long it takes. Mm-hmm. I've also heard that from people applying for federal jobs. I know OPM has a major role in this area, but of course so does OMB. Can you commit to working with us here on this committee and with OPM to identify solutions for improving the merit-based hiring process?
Absolutely. Look at the infrastructure law. We think we need at least 4,000 new federal employees just to implement that law. So OPM and working with us and our Deputy Director for Management are working on waivers and things we can do to bring people in faster. We do this in certain places well, but we've got to do more to broaden. I've been a civil servant, and it is you need a advanced degree in some cases to learn how to get through the hiring system. So you have my commitment to work on that.
Well, thank you. I just think we've got to step that up in a big way, especially given the new commitments that need to be met with the legislation that's been passed. It sometimes is overlooked, but the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs is, of course, a part of OMB and serves the government as the central authority for the review of regulations. Federal agencies submit significant proposed and final rules to OIRA, and there are currently over 80 regulatory actions under review, such as improvements to energy efficiency standards. How will you prioritize these regulatory actions if you are confirmed?
Senator, they're all important. I've learned one of the greatest learning curves, and one thing I've spent a lot of time in the last 10 months is learning the OIRA process. It is essential to making sure the President's vision is carried out when it comes to regulatory policy. and also make sure that we are doing a consistent job around competition, equity, these values and executive orders that the president has put forth. They need to be represented in our regulatory policy. There are some things, we have clear direction from the president that are priorities that we need to move faster, especially in the area of climate change. But they're all important. Many of these things that have been on the shelf for many, many years. So we are working with the staff we have to clear all of them out once they come in from agency review.
Well, thank you. I hope you will urge the president to appoint an administrator for that part of OMB, because there are lots of important actions that are awaiting final decision. Ms. Coloretti, during your time as Deputy Secretary of HUD, HUD was the most improved mid-sized department in the Partnership for Public Services Best Places to Work study. Could you talk a little bit about the steps you took to accomplish that and about the Biden administration's plan to improve employee engagement so that every federal worker is able to do the best job possible for the American people? What lessons did you learn there that we can apply government-wide?
Senator, thanks for that question and for your leadership on this issue. We did use data, first and foremost, to help us understand where our scores were when we were at the very rank bottom when I was the Deputy Secretary of HUD on this Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. And so we looked at the data, and one thing we learned was that only 51% of employees had filled out the survey. And so what that served to do was managers were not convinced that that was a real score, even though it was low. So one of the things we did was do an effective push to actually increase participation in the survey, thinking that if we really are at this low of a score, we might as well find out for sure. And we were able to get our participation rate up to the 75 to 80% in one year, and it had been 51. That served to get a better set of data to understand what areas and what questions were scoring low. And so what we learned was it was really employee engagement. There are several questions that are targeted at employee engagement, and it's important for each agency to look at those and how it applies to their agency. For HUD, what we did was we actually did a couple of things. We worked with every SES manager, and we also did some crowdsourcing to get ideas from people about how to improve and strengthen HUD. And as part of that project, that set of projects and deep dive we did, was how we were engaging with employees. And we noticed that on those particular scores, all of those scores went up. And as you know, and you probably know this from looking at the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, when employees are more engaged, it actually serves to increase all the scores. And so that's really how we did it. But we first and foremost used data to help us understand what was happening on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Let me thank Ms. Young and Ms. Coloretti for appearing before the committee today. This is your second committee appearance, huh? It's been a long day. Your full statements will be included in the record. As information for all senators, questions for the record are due by 12 noon tomorrow, with signed hard copies delivered to the committee clerk in Dirksen 624. Email copies will also be accepted. Under committee rules, Ms. Young and Ms. Coloretti will have 7 days from receipt of our questions to respond with answers. With no further business before the committee, this hearing is adjourned.